podcast series that we're creating in collaboration with Mariana Radisic Koliren, the founder of the tour operator Lunfarda Travel, and some of the local tour guides, Julia and Esteban. Here's some short facts about Lunfarda Travel. It's based in the heart of San Telmo, the oldest suburb of Buenos Aires, Argentina. And the company was founded in 2019 by Mariana, a Jewish, queer Argentinian self-made power woman who's leading it by the principles of equality, empowerment, and intersectionality through thriving with diversity, working together with different communities. So today's episode is going to be with Mariana herself. She is the founder of Lunfarda Travel, and we are going to talk about the importance of queer tourism, Argentina's process as an LGBTQ-friendly country, current movements, and the current situations. So hi Mariana, how are you?
Hi Anna, it's lovely to be with you again talking about intersectionality and all things travel.
Yes, I know, I'm so excited, so I couldn't wait. So probably you know what my first question will be for you. Why is there a need for queer tourism?
Well, the traveler community is very diverse in general in the world, and every single segment of this diverse community of travelers has specific needs. So for example, when we talk about the LGBTQ plus community specifically, they might encounter problems like, imagine I go with my girlfriend to a hotel and maybe they put us on separate beds because they assumed that we wouldn't be a couple because maybe homosexuality is illegal in that place. So what's happening when you're a trans person checking into a flight, when you're checking into a hotel? We have very specific problematics within the LGBTQ plus community, and by creating our own resources to help travelers be more comfortable, we can actually make travel more inclusive for this myriad of issues that LGBTQ travelers experience.
Okay. Yes, I can totally see that, and there's some gay tours that are offered, but what differentiates Lunfarda's queer tour from other tours on the market?
Well, we're based in Argentina, which is one of the most progressive countries in the world when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights. We have legal same-sex marriage for now over 10 years. We have the gender identity law, which allows you to change genders for gender-affirming documentation. And when I started going online about 5 years ago and I started Googling gay tour, expecting to find someone that would teach me how Argentina went from being a very conservative Catholic country and turned into such an incredible place for, basically human rights and LGBTQ plus rights, I didn't really find anything. You would have just a gay guide who would show you the highlights of Buenos Aires. So when I saw this, I felt like we needed to find a way to tell the story of the LGBTQ plus community, not just for our community itself, but because there are so many countries in the world where homosexuality is illegal. In some countries, it's even punishable by death. And we were able to gain so much in such a short time. So I always thought that by creating a tour where we would not just share history, but also political strategies, we could help people from all over the world, hopefully, become activists and maybe try some of the same solutions we have in Argentina in their own countries.
I agree. This indeed is very important, and Argentina is very progressive in that sense. Buenos Aires as well is vibrant, colorful, and people stand up for their rights and enjoy themselves in the city. You have a lot of queer bars, clubs, cafes in San Telmo or Palermo. You also visit them during your queer tours. What I'm curious about, and also probably our listeners, is how's it to be queer in Buenos Aires?
Well, if you're going to be queer, Buenos Aires is definitely one of the best places to be queer because, as you mentioned, there are not just LGBTQ cafes and bars in San Telmo where our office is located, but all really across the city. We have cultural centers, we have community centers, we have a really great ballroom scene where we have kids and people from all ages doing voguing and doing runway. Obviously, when it comes to having legal protections, Argentina is one of the best places in the world where you can find yourself. But that being said, we didn't have any legislation whatsoever just 30 years ago. So we're still catching up as a society. I think it's definitely become safer and more inclusive as time has gone by, but that doesn't really mean that LGBTQ identities are completely accepted in Argentina. Even though we are in a very good place, there's still so much we need to do so that the perception of society really matches the legislation that we have, which is really amazing.
Okay, and do you have like a personal story? How was it for you?
Well, for me, it's always been very easy in a sense. I always tell the story that I realized that I was bisexual when I first saw this music video on MTV by this Russian band called Tattoo. There were these two chicks, kissing each other under the rain, and I'm like, whoa, that's hot. That's when I realized I was bisexual. Years later, I realized I was actually pansexual, which means I have a love for all genders. And even I remember when I came out to my mom, I was in the tarmac of an airport in Uruguay, and I'm like, Mom, I'm bisexual. And she's like, oh, it's just a phase. But beyond her realizing that it wasn't going to be a phase, I didn't really experience a lot of backlash from my own family. I wasn't, expelled from my house because of being LGBTQ+. The school that I went to was very liberal, so LGBTQ+ identities were actually accepted in my school. My high school, Carlos Pellegrini, was the first high school in the country to provide one of their alums with a certificate, like a diploma, that matched their gender identity. So I definitely came from a very liberal hub, and I was very thankful to grow in that sort of sphere. But I definitely know that this is not the reality for so many people in Argentina and in Buenos Aires, and that is part of what really drives what I do. I wish that, this was the common story. Like, I came out and really nothing happened, and I was able to live my life okay, and I didn't have any issues with getting a job because I'm LGBT. I hope that one day this is the reality for everyone across the spectrum, and that's one of the main reasons why we do what we do.
Okay, yes, that's very important for the community, I think, as well. And before you mentioned all the things that are happening in Argentina in the community, like ballrooms and in the queer scene, and also that you went to a very open-minded school. What makes Buenos Aires so fun to visit as a tourist?
Well, we are a very big city. We're one of the largest capitals in Latin America. We are the safest capital in all of South America. And if you're someone from the queer community, it really doesn't matter what kind of queer you are, because sometimes marketing tends to put all of LGBTQ travelers in the same bag as if we all travel the same way, but that's not the case. So if you're someone who really enjoys like the outdoors and being in the outback country, we have amazing national parks where you can go, and you can definitely be queer openly in most of the national parks of Argentina. If you're someone who's really into nightlife, well, hello, Buenos Aires is one of the places where you can actually party up until 6 a.m. and then go to an after club and end your partying at 10 a.m. I think it's only something that I saw in Berlin, which is more partying than in Buenos Aires. So if you're a party person, then that's your go-to place. But if you're more of a chill person, there's so many museums, foodie opportunities. And I think something that bears mentioning specifically now that there are so many, queer families that are out there is Argentina protects queer families. Our legislation recognizes queer families. So if you are, say, a trans couple and you're traveling with your kids to Argentina, if you have a medical emergency, if anything happens, we will be able to respect your rights as a family. And I think that framework of legality and how is it going to go for me even when things go bad, that's something that queer travelers are very much on the lookout for, and that's just one of the many reasons why queer travelers continue to choose Argentina and continue to choose Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires has now been for decades a queer-friendly destination.
That's awesome to hear, and I also got to experience a little bit of it myself, the nightlife that you talked about, which I can definitely recommend. How's the connection and coexistence within the LGBTQ plus community, which indeed is big itself?
Well, as I explained earlier, LGBTQ plus people were not a monolith, so definitely the experiences that, say, a white, cis, pansexual woman like myself will have will very much be different from the experiences of someone who is a racialized, brown, trans person. So I think we need to consider these sorts of differences. There is still largely discrimination against the trans community in Argentina, even though the trans community has made strides in visibility and we now have quotas for public spaces to hire trans people. It is still very, it's almost impossible to go into the travel industry and find a front desk clerk that's going to be trans or find a non-binary tour guide. Obviously, this is something that is much larger than the travel industry, but speaks to systemic issues of discrimination. People who are from the trans and non-binary communities statistically are less able to go to college, to learn English as a second language, and then of course this creates barriers of access to formal professionals later on. So I would say that the community is not completely cohesive, but unlike other countries where you have this movement called the TERFs, so the Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists, which basically say that trans rights are a completely separate issue from, say, women's rights or lesbian rights or whatnot. Here in Argentina, that is largely not the case. We have understood the LGBTQ plus movement, the feminist movement, that we're all fighting for the same thing, which is the freedom of owning up to our own identities and not face any discrimination for being our own authentic selves. So it's not up to par in every part of the community, and I think that today we need to concentrate our efforts more in helping the trans and non-binary community achieve the same levels of visibility and employability that we see across other parts of the spectrum.
Yeah, speaking of, I know that Lunfarda Travel has been working together with different organizations. One of them, which you also visit during the Queer History Tour, is Muchas Celis, a non-profit organization that provides free education and training programs for transgender individuals and the queer community. Their aim is to promote social inclusion, gender equality, and human rights by empowering the individuals with tools and resources they need to achieve their goals and widen employability, because you also mentioned that it's really rare to see a queer person in certain jobs. So that organization is amazing, and by the way, the first ever school for transgender people. Are there more organizations or initiatives like Muchas Celis? What is happening in that sense in Buenos Aires?
Well, Muchas Celis is, as you said, a high school that is not just for the trans community, and this is really important. It is run by the trans and non-binary community. So it's not like cisgender people saying like, hey, we're going to get the trans population educated, but rather the trans community saw themselves a need for education. They saw how the formal institutions were not welcoming enough, and they created their own institutions. And I think this is a key aspect to it, because this organization relies on grassroots activism. It has been a model that is now being replicated all over the world. So Muchas Celis was the first school that specifically catered to trans and non-binary people, but now there are about some 20 projects that are following in the footsteps of Muchas Celis. We love this project. I've personally been involved with them for some years now, and it goes far beyond education. This school provides employability tools, they provide healthcare access, they provide really all sorts of things that the trans community cannot access on their own. So for us, we continue to work with this organization, and one of the things that I personally want to see and that we're slowly in the works to do is to create a program so that people from these schools, they can actually learn the tools to become tour guides. I've been working with my good friends Gustavo Noguera and Pablo De Luca, who are the presidents of the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce and Tourism, and we're hopefully trying to find ways that people who finish this high school program, they can go for free to university to study tourism, and at the same time they can get training from companies like my own, so that they can gain the soft skills so that one day we can see non-binary people at a front desk, we can see a trans tour guide, and it won't be a disruptive thing, but rather just another part of the normal diversity of any society.
Okay, yeah, that's amazing, and in that way also your product and also your company really contributes to that progress. What also Muchas Celis has as an objective I also think they're an amazing organization. And speaking of the process, you already mentioned this earlier, you touched on it. It all was introduced in 2011 that was making surgical operations to adapt to the body and develop personality according to self-perceived identity has been made compulsory in medical plans. That's a huge milestone as well. I'm wondering, do you know how's the implementation of that? Is it easy for people to access? Do you know people that have done a transition?
Yeah, I actually have many friends from the trans and non-binary community that have done gender affirming procedures. That's what we call them, gender affirming. There used to be a lot of different terms, but that's what we go with these days. As you mentioned, we have this law that was passed about 10 years ago that is called the Gender Identity Law, and basically it says that if I, Mariana, I'm a trans man, then I can go to a public registration office and change my documents so that I can get a male sign. I could also get a non-binary sign. We have legal non-binary identities in Argentina as well. And even if I don't have this document with another gender than the one that I was assigned at birth, I can still go to any medical plan, to the public healthcare, and get gender affirming care. That being said, we are in Argentina, which is a Latin American country that is severely underfunded and going through a major economic crisis. And what this means is that sometimes if you are a non-binary person trying to get a hysterectomy, basically you get your boobs removed so that you get a more masculine or gender-neutral chest. The wait times for that are sometimes 6 months, 8 months. Let's remember that gender dysphoria, which is a medical condition that really creates an unpleasant situation in the body that you were born into. This is a major driver for suicide ideation and for actual suicide. So gender affirming care is not just a plastic surgery. It is something that is completely related to the mental well-being of the trans and non-binary communities. And so one of the new fights that we have to do, because this is a non-ending quest, right? Like you get the legislation and now we're fighting for quick implementation for these medical procedures. But I would say that is not something that just the trans and non-binary community experience, but rather anyone who has to go through a medical procedure these days is subject to these awful wait times.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, now the legislation is there, but the implementation is a whole new thing for itself, and also, not just for that, but in general. There are still some improvements to do, and you also mentioned the national identification that people can change without getting surgery or without changing their gender. So far, more than 9,000 people have already changed theirs in Argentina. Mm-hmm. That's an amazing breakthrough and progressive advancement in Argentina. But what we've just talked about also showed how it can be maybe difficult implementing these things. What are the next steps for the community to gain rights?
Well, I think that the next steps for the community is really gaining access to positions of power. I think, we don't have trans legislators, we don't have trans Congress people, we don't have trans business owners, we don't have queer women in positions of power. Definitely for gay men, specifically white cisgender gay men, they have been able to integrate more broadly into society, but I think for many people this is still not the case. So there's one thing that I always say when we talk about our tours, which is we have gained as a community visibility, but what we don't yet have is economic empowerment. And I love visibility, and I think it's really important. I think you can't have any further debate without visibility. But what good is visibility if the people are out there, they're visible, but they still can't make ends meet, if they still can't go to college, if they still can't open their own businesses? I think that's the next step, and in that sense, I really want to highlight the amazing work that the LGBTQ Chamber of not just tourism but commerce is doing in empowering all of these LGBTQ plus owned businesses and helping them gain more access to basically the commerce industry.
Yes, thank God these people are there to change something. For many people, actually, Eva Perón was an idol that helped the poor and underserved. She also had many friends in the homosexual scene. During that time, she stood up to help establish human rights for women and homosexuals. So what do you think of Eva Perón? Is she an icon for the community?
Eva Perón is a topic that is larger than life, and we could spend like 5 or 6 hours just talking about Evita. But yeah, Evita Perón, she was the first lady of Argentina in the 1940s, and that was a time where definitely homosexuality was not acceptable in Argentina. But Evita did come out of the theater scene. She used to be a theater kid, she was a cinema actress, she was a radio hostess, and obviously when you're in that circle, you end up meeting lots of queer people. So Evita actually created something kind of weird, which was that she brought many of her queer friends with her when she became first lady. So she had Paco Jamandreu, and she had many other stylists and fashionistas that were very renowned as gay people, and she was able to bring them to a center of her public sphere of influence. And then you have these really interesting contradictions. Like, for example, one time Evita went to this wedding at the Cathedral of Buenos Aires, and Paco Jamandreu, who was her stylist, actually showed up with his partner. So imagine how crazy 2 gay men walking inside of the cathedral just because Evita Perón kind of like protected them. She also helped this very important queer actor come from Spain, escaping the dictatorship of Franco. But those are some accounts. And then other accounts tell you that Paco Jamandreu would call Evita at 5 in the morning when he was at a gay bar, and the police would come making a police razzia, and Evita would be like, well, what are you doing at 5 a.m. at a gay bar? You should know that this is still not okay. So Evita is a controversial icon, no matter from where you take her, but she definitely has this sort of, queer influence that was already present in her life, but then became just larger than life and completely international when Andrew Lloyd Webber created the Evita musical, and then of course Madonna played Evita Perón, so how could the gays not love it after that?
Yeah, indeed, it's quite impressive that already back in then she had a big influence on it, and it's amazing actually to hear about that. Argentina is on the top list for LGBTQ plus rights. There are quite some movements that are happening that we already talked about. And it was, like you said, the 10th country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage. Activism through protests was one key factor to provocate reactions and rock through on policies. What does activism of the LGBTQ community look like nowadays? And are people still protesting on the street?
Well, as Argentines, we're always protesting because there's always more to do, right, for any community. As I said, we have really great legislation nowadays, but the cultural experience has not matched the legal rights that we have in Argentina, and especially when it comes to the institutions, they still tend to be on the very kind of conservative side. So some years ago, there were these 2 women who were lighting up a cigarette at a train station, which is just a contravention. You just get like a ticket and that's it. But they ended up going to jail for it. And they had a very homophobic judge that actually ruled against them on Lesbian Visibility Day, which was a huge, huge scandal. Eventually, the trial of these women was completely overturned. They were released of all charges. But that's just one of the concrete examples that I can give you of how the institutions are still not up to date with the legislation. And then, of course, as I said, the LGBTQ plus community is not a monolith, and there are many people who still experience very bad discrimination and violence, especially the trans community. There is a man called Tehuel de la Torre, and he went to a job interview some years ago, and he never came back. So we are still fighting to see what happened to this person. There are still so many people who are from the trans community who go missing, and it looks, when this happens, that the state doesn't really destine the same amount of resources and effort to try to bring justice for these people as they would for other members in the community. That being said, we have made very big advancements in general when it comes to visibility, but as I said, we still need to gain economic empowerment across all parts of our community, and this is why every year when we have our Pride, which is in November, we don't just celebrate all of the milestones that we have, but we continue to think, okay, so what's next? We want gender inclusive language to be accepted at a state level and at all education levels. We want the sexual education that people have from elementary school to be gender inclusive and to be aware and include the experiences of LGBTQ plus people. So of course this looks like very progressive debates, especially considering that in some other countries you can't even begin to have a debate like this, but we really want to become a place where there is total and absolute equality, and we still are not there yet.
Okay, yeah, we have talked quite a bit now about the successes that have been happening in the country. We can tell the dice is rolling and Argentina is processing, but there's still quite a way to go, and we've also touched on quite some obstacles that are still to overcome for the community. Now, my last question for you is, what are some recent achievements, also some future goals, or what are the next steps with Lunfarda Travel?
I think we have many achievements in the community. I'm particularly happy about the fact that now non-binary people can legally exist, not just in reality, but in papers as well. It makes me really proud that Argentina continues to be chosen as one of the safest and best destinations for LGBTQ plus travelers. I hope that for Lunfarda we can continue to make this tour grow. There are so many people from the LGBTQ community that travel around the world, and I think that creating tours about the specific experience of these communities and sharing them is paramount for us to understand which strategies work where, and to really create an international community that can really fight together, because even if we have all of these rights in Argentina, many countries that are neighboring to us still don't have these rights, so we still see people who are basically LGBTQ plus refugees coming in from other parts of South America. So I think tourism can play a very big and important role in helping develop strategies that will work for international communities. So if you want to know more about how to create a tour that is specific to an LGBTQ community, you can go to intersectionaltravelmovement.org, and there I actually created a manual, the Lunfarda Method Manual, that will basically bring you on a step-by-step guide of how I created this tour, how I worked intersectionally with parts of the community that are not my own, like the trans community, and how you can maybe do something similar in your own city, in your own country, and connect to people from the LGBT community around the world, and hopefully inspire them with the stories from your own community as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mariana, for talking about everything you know. And we will definitely put the link below of the Intersectional Travel Movement for all the people that want to create a queer tour, an intersectional queer tour, obviously. It was very helpful to get your insights today and to get an update on how things are in Buenos Aires, and hopefully motivate a lot of people to come and visit it, because it's great in all aspects, in many aspects, sorry. Okay, thank you, Mariana.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting us talk about all of these really important things for the travel industry that still need to be way more discussed across the table.
It was a lot of fun. I hope we can do it more often. And for all the other ones, keep in mind that Lunfarda Travel is working together on building equality, diversity and empowerment in tourism through an intersectional approach by working together with underserved communities. They are striving for accurate representations by sharing and letting people share their stories. 10% of the profit generated by the tour is donated or contributed to organizations in local communities, in this case, muchas cities. If you want to support Lunfarda with that, you can book our tour directly through the website lunfardatravel.com or write an email at hello@lunfardatravel.com. And if you want to donate directly to Muchas Cities, you can do so through our website. I will leave the links in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and please, if you liked our podcast, feel free to share it on social media and link us. We're always happy to spread the word, and if you have some feedback, comments, or new inspirations, you can write to us or find us on Instagram under Lunfarda Travel.